Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to share some thoughts and theories about Doctor Who, in particular Series 13. Just some things that kind of been running through my mind, as well as some stuff I brought up when I was talking about the Series 12 finale. Obviously, we've got, the reveal about the Doctor situation, that the Doctor isn't who they thought they were. That basically it's like, oh, I'm actually this being known as the Timeless Child, and that basically my entire life, what I thought it was, ended up being a lie, that literally everyone around me has lied. And so now with this revelation, because obviously we saw at the end, the Doctor's still dealing with it, herself, because she hasn't told her companions, and none of them know what she's necessarily dealing with, because that was a conversation just between her and the Master. And obviously, like, things not being done with them, like, he's always, a constant in the Doctor's life. And so obviously I'm blanking on the Doctor's other name, because obviously the Doctor ran into herself in the form of Ruth, but it's like that's the Doctor in the past, a past she doesn't remember. So I'm assuming maybe parts of Series 13 would be about her regaining all those memories about, like, the stuff that she was up to, the very bad things that she was up to, like kind of realizing that the Doctor, that's because I think that's kind of an interesting thing, because obviously, like, a whole identity was given to you. It's like, oh, you were this person, you are the Doctor, but it's like that's not who you really are. And so it's like maybe the darker stuff that you did prior to you becoming who you believed yourself to be, that still stays with you, and what that kind of means, how this impacts the Doctor going forward. It's like, which is interesting to think, like, the Doctor's going to have an identity crisis, considering the Doctor has been multiple people, has at this point in time been 13, technically 14 people this entire time. So it adds this element of just kind of interesting to think of someone who is technically a different person so many different times over the course of their thousands of years of life, for you to find out that because at the very least you think at the core, I am who I always am. Like, my personality might change, but who I am at my core is still the same. But it's like that core of who you are is a lie. And so it's like, well, who's the real you? Because the little bit we got with Ruth, it just seemed like even she was a little, I don't know, just the interactions between her and the Doctor, when it seemed like Ruth was a little more, I don't know, seemed a little more cutthroat in my opinion. Maybe that was just me, it has been a while, so maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but it just, I don't know, she seemed a little harsher than, granted, the Doctor can be harsh when the time, comes about, but it's just like dealing with that. And the fact of the matter is, you haven't confided in it, because the Doctors learn all this stuff about everyone else, but this is something, and to be fair, I always say that's kind of an interesting thing, because in the grand scheme of things, none of the companions ever really have ever gotten to know everything there is to know about the Doctor, because every time something comes up there, they're like, wait, oh, I didn't notice about you, because the Doctor doesn't really talk about themselves. In whichever form, any past regeneration. I feel like the only person I feel like probably knows the Doctor the best would be Clara, maybe. She might be the only one that knows the Doctor best. Just because she, because of her whole situation, she was kind of there for the Doctor's entire life. So it's kind of like she might be the only person. But even then, it's like, does she know everything there is to know? Because obviously that's from what we know, because obviously everything's changed. So it's like she's probably only been in these past 13, technically 14 regenerations, because that started at 1, from when it goes back, like Clara's story and connection to the Doctor ties her back to the first Doctor, but that was technically not the first Doctor. That was actually probably like, who knows how many regenerations the Doctor had way before, how many lives the Doctor has had way before now. So, like, that's so much of your memory gone, and it's like there's so little of it left, like, about going about retrieving that, what that means in the grand scheme of things. I mean, and if you do learn the stuff about yourself, is it going to be stuff that you're going to want to know? I mean, it's like, regardless of whether you want to know it or not, it's still a part of yourself, like, I have to know, whether the good, the bad, and the ugly, So I think that's going to be an interesting development for it. And for the series, but there's also the whole situation of the companion situation. And this is something I brought up in the Series 12 finale. With everything that's set up, this might be the last go-around for these companions. I mean, the companions are never with the Doctor forever, just because, like, living this particular life doesn't always work out. Obviously, in some cases, the companion might die, or kind of, on those lane of things, or at least just something happens that changes Because I think I was thinking about it recently. Like, I think the only person where everything kind of worked out a little more copacetic, at least that we're aware of, is probably... I mean, you can make the arguments about Rose. I mean, she was reunited with her dad. She kind of has to live in an alternate dimension. You know, I mean, granted, she did return, like, back in season 4, series 4. But things kind of worked out for her. I think the only... You can make the argument is probably, like... I mean, in my head, immediately, I'm thinking, like, Martha. And then maybe, like, a case could technically be made for Clara. But even that's, like, a whole complicated thing in itself. But obviously, it's just rolling with the Doctor doesn't always work out. And obviously, last series kind of showed us kind of, like, you know, for them, it's like... In particular, Ryan, for example. Because for Ryan, it's the thing of, like, he, you know, he's scared of, like, oh, yeah, like, life is passing him by. Because it's the whole thing of, like, oh, wait. Because obviously, rolling with the Doctor, time being the way it is, you don't always go back to the moment you left. For them, it's like, wait, our lives are kind of passed us by. And it's like Ryan, and obviously that's a fear of his, like, oh, I wasn't there when the people in my life, you know, I'm missing my life, I'm missing the people that are, you know, they're in my life, because I'm missing it as life kind of passes by. I'm having this grand adventure, but obviously the dangers of it, but on top of all that, just like the life you're not going to be able to, that you're leaving behind as well. And I think that kind of ties into Graham, because obviously Graham's got his concerns about, you know, his illness coming back, and obviously, you know, still having to deal with the fact is, hey, Grace isn't there anymore. Especially, that could also turn into a whole complicated thing, especially if Ryan and his dad, because it seems like obviously because of the New Year's special that came out, what was it, between series 11 and 12, they ended up, you know, mending a lot of fences, so they're better off. So it's like, you know, if things get better between Ryan and his dad, then maybe Graham feels like, oh, maybe I'm being a little more on the outs. I mean, granted, Graham and Ryan have definitely grown closer, but maybe that could be a concern of Graham's in the past, because it's like, oh, we're not blood related. This is still your dad, you're by blood. So it's like, I'm not family by blood, but still family regardless, you know? So... And then there's the whole thing with Yaz, you know, it's like obviously we learned a little bit more about her past, why she wanted to become a cop in the first place, and maybe all that's going to push into the point where, you know, like I said, Ryan seems like the one that's the most being like, yeah, this might be the end of the line for him, that he won't be continuing this forever. But, you know, it seems like maybe that'll be a direction that happens, you know, that maybe Yaz and... Graham kind of, because I think Yaz and Ryan were kind of having that conversation a little bit, so I think she probably feels it too, and maybe Graham will too. Like, I think that's going to be a thing, especially if the Doctor's dealing with all this, like potentially having to deal with that alone, especially because the Doctor is keeping them at a distance, not telling them everything. Because another thing you also have to consider too, that we've never circled back to storyline wise, is Jack's reappearance and all this, and obviously Jack knowing, like, he had an idea about like what was going to go down, and like how he knew what he knew. And obviously, will him and the Doctor meet up this scene, because he's so excited to see the Doctor. He's like, oh my god, the Doctor's a lady now. Holy shit, I gotta see this, you know? So what that means in the grand scheme of things, like when they reunite and what that story ends up being, because obviously this is also going to have to fill us in on like what Jack's been up to since, what, like season 4 of Torchwood is the last thing we saw. And which is even interesting to think about, because like, that took place in the States. Granted, it was a worldwide thing, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen Torchwood. I'm also curious, and this is something I'm curious, will they ever tie in any of the storylines from The Class? Was it The Class or was it just Class? No, I think it was The Class. Which I'm super bummed that show was super short-lived. But the fact of the matter is, like, I'm curious. Like, there are certain storylines that were set up in there. Like, I'm curious will they kind of continue and, you know, bring anything in from that fold in. Especially because they were doing interesting stuff with like the Weeping Angels. That I'm like, you know. But maybe not. Maybe that's just going to be left where it was and won't necessarily. I don't know. You never know what someone might pull from in the future. That continuity's there for the picking, so you never know. Those characters are there for the picking as well. But like I said, that all, you know, because it could just be that thing of like, oh yeah, we didn't, like, their story is kind of left untold, and we get like the end chapter of it, like when they pop up, it's like, oh man, we'll never know what all that you've been through. Very similar to Jack in that regard, you know. So they're probably going to like quickly fill you in of like, oh man, what have you been up to this entire time? The last time we saw, because I want to say the last time the Doctor and Jack saw each other was with him and. Who was he with? Was he with Martha at the time? So that had to be like season 3. I think it was with Martha. I could be mistaken. It's been a while, so I'm not remembering as well. Not unless that was with Rose. I don't remember. Well, it had to be either one, because it definitely was 10, because it was after, obviously, because Torchwood takes place after the Doctor lost his hand at the beginning of series 2. Regardless, it's been a very, very long time. And something else I always like to think about too is like, well, let's not forget Jack's also still got that whole immortality thing kind of going for him. So it's like, who knows how long it's been timeline wise for, you know, since he saw the Doctor. It might not have just been like a, in the grand scheme of the things of like the show, it's like time is, you know, what it is in the show, so you never really know how much time really passes by, especially for Jack or the Doctor, you know. And since, you know, circling back, I should, you know, talk about the fact is because I brought it up, but I didn't really dive into it. It's like, once again, like the Doctor ran into herself in the form of Ruth, but it's like, who's to say the Doctor won't end up running into other previous lives as well going forward? I mean, who's to say the Doctor hasn't met other versions of themselves and they just didn't realize it at the time? You know, stuff like that has to be considered as well. I mean, because this wouldn't be the first time the Doctor's run into themselves, but obviously this is a different situation. This is, you are, the Doctor ran into the Doctor, but this is the Doctor running into like a different version of yourself, a different, and an almost entirely different life, not just a different regeneration like, you know, with 10 and 11, you know. So it just, it presents a very interesting circumstance. I'm also curious, are those beings that because I'm blanking on their names now, the ones that the Master joined up with in series 11, those light beings from like a different dimension, like are they going to pop back up? Will we see them in series 13? And something that had crossed my mind that never really came up again was also like, what about Yaz? Like, she was in that world, like, obviously the Doctor was as well, but it's like, being there, like, is it going to have any lasting effects on Yaz? Because to my recollection, nothing really came about that, and, you know, maybe that's just kind of, everything's fine, but maybe not. Like, maybe there are going to be some after effects in series 13, or maybe there really weren't any. I don't know. Obviously, these are just some of the things kind of going through my head. I'd love to get to know your thoughts in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.